my daughter Ruby was 4 at the time and had a cavity in preschool. And while she had a Black woman preschool teacher, junk food as rewards was a thing. And I get it. It's non-perishable, shelf-stable, all these pragmatic ways of thinking. But what are the nutritional consequences to these items in our school system should also be considered in the creation of a whole, well-developed child. And I just had her reflect and say, well, would you feed this to your children? Are they feeding this to your children at their school? And so I think just bringing it full center of like, how do I have this teacher see herself in a new identity as a food hero for our community and as a food freedom fighter on the front line of not only fighting for a better educational system, but a whole well-developed child and the role that nutrition can play in that.
So Rasheeta, before we bring in Tambra, tell me what you had for dinner.
Well, Tambra probably gonna be like, girl, you are falling right into the hands of the man, because we had some chicken. Honestly, so this is great discussion. Like, I'm looking forward to finding out more, which will hopefully help motivate me to think a lot more carefully about what I'm consuming and what I allow my children to consume, because honestly, we're always on the go. And I think that we don't think enough about what we're consuming. It's that very convenient, fast food, which I know is definitely not what we were, what is good for you. And it certainly does not help. And honestly, I felt really tired lately. I know it has a lot to do with what I'm consuming or what I'm putting in my body, because I'm getting the byproduct of that, which is that fatigue, that not having the energy that you need. And I know it's because of the type of fuel I'm giving my body, right? I'm giving it 87 and not 93. And so I'm looking forward to this conversation, because we do eat on the fly a lot. And I think that I want to get more motivated to meal prep. And like, what does that look like? I think for the audience, knowing the history of food can help us see why we should be thinking more consciously about it. And so for you, Rochelle, how do you feel about, and what did you have for dinner?
Listen, I'm not judging you. I'm just we're all doing this together.
Yes.
I think we made like some Trader Joe's ravioli or something, like quick and easy, but it's not always full of nutrition. And so, we try, really try. And I think there's some things that I did early on with my children that helps them to love vegetables and fruits. And, like we didn't introduce meat right away, which was hard because I do eat meat. But I've seen how they don't fight us on vegetables at all. But that doesn't mean that we're always getting in the right portions or even the right amount of, the right kind of vegetables. So yes, Tambra will definitely give us insight. But I love how you said, learning the history of food can motivate us to eat better, right? So that is really her expertise. She is an activist and she's a scholar doing incredible work to help us to really think about food health and the fight for equity. So let's bring her in.
Come on down. Hi, Tambra.
Hi, Tamara.
Hi. Thank you so much for having this conversation. It's important, it's timely, it's relevant, and we are the ones we've been waiting for.
That's right. That's right.
Come in, swinging. She comes in,
right?
I love it.
So Tambra, on your website, and we'll share this in our link, IamWANDA.org. I want you to tell us about this organization, how it came to be, and remind you of something that you put as a statement on your website, which says, "We are the cultural keepers of the knowledge, meal healers of the community, and culinary change makers of the world." That is a fantastic mission and just a philosophical statement that is really important, and has helped. This is why we have identified this episode as cultural keepers. That's coming from your words exactly. So tell us more about the organization, how you started it, why you started it, and bring us up to speed.
Most definitely. So I started WANDA 9 years ago. We'll celebrate our 10th anniversary in 2026. And at that time, I was coming to a place just in my own personal journey and life of seeing my career trajectory, realizing that between Michelle Obama really being the first iconic Black woman at the highest level of the US to speak out on food, I was like, who beyond the political lens will carry on the torch that can bring community together? Also, I was a mom, still am. You never stop being a mom, but my daughter Ruby was 4 at the time and had a cavity in preschool. And while she had a Black woman preschool teacher, junk food as rewards was a thing. And I get it. It's non-perishable, shelf stable, all these pragmatic ways of thinking. But what are the nutritional consequences to these items in our school system? Should also be considered in the creation of a whole, well-developed child. And I just had her reflect and say, well, would you feed this to your children? Are they feeding this to your children at their school? And so I think just bringing it full center of like, how do I have this teacher see herself in a new identity as a food hero for our community and as a food freedom fighter on the front line of not only fighting for a better educational system, but a whole well-developed child and the role that nutrition can play in that. And so for me, instead of begrudging about it, like, let me create an organization, having been influenced by growing up, not only in Oklahoma around entrepreneurship, but just being even in Boston, learning about social ventures and how can I create one that centers Black women, because part of my experience being in Boston was working for a Black women's health organization that's now defunct, but the Edie is still my mentor. And I was her health com person. And imagine being able to be in a place where you're designing messages for seasoned sisters, spicy sisters across different generations. Um, it's powerful to think to be in a space where you're anchoring women who look like you. I've never been in that space before. And so it was memorable, it was impactful. I said when I came to DC, I looked for those spaces. I didn't find them. They were, by body part, breast cancer over here, AIDS over here, mental health over here. I'm like, I'm a whole ass woman. So for me, it was recognizing that even the way our systems or funding, whatever is being designed, is not bringing us to our full selves. And so for me, I just reflected on my own journeys growing up in an African diasporan household in the heartland, and just bringing my full experiences and say, if I were to reimagine a world, what would that world look like? Even against all the stereotypes and narratives that challenge us to believe that we are great. And I said, we need to have a belief that, and a reality that our culture matters, that we are the culture, our food matters. It has sustained us thus far. And while it might have been hijacked, we can reclaim what is the soul goodness of it, the essence. And that is the essence that resides within us, that's deep down in our memory cells, in our DNA, that just with the right ingredient, like a okra or bitter leaf or millet or moringa, can unlock, and how the ancestors pouring through those dishes each and every time. And the contextuality and the humanity of food has been stripped away, just like stripping away the fiber and vitamin minerals in our own grains. And so for me, it's like, nutritionally, how can that be a metaphor of replenishing back and pulling again, bringing back to ourselves again? And to me, there's a number of folks who have been Pan-African activists writing about food, and being at my grandma's neighborhood in Northeast Oklahoma City, in the Black bookstore, in the corner, sitting, reading some of these naturopathic books and books by Black men who were like, food has been weaponized against our community. That saw food in a new way that I had not seen written, and seeing so many news stories around Black health in a negative light. Like all of these experiences just came to me of like, I'm just sick and tired, like Fannie Lou Hamer, of just the narratives. And so it was that pathway that had me to say, I don't need another PhD in nutrition. We know we know the science, and while there could be more science in the exploration of the dark matter of food, the reality is we have to change our minds, because our minds have been hijacked and manipulated, and we have to reclaim our memory and our narratives in a way that gives us the path to see the possibility of a new future that begins by connecting to our past and honoring those who have made a foundation for us to still keep going, even in the midst of all the chaos, but to know that our very existence is part of the resistance.
Wow.
And that's why food matters.
Okay, we can.
And our health matters.
We are currently ending the podcast because
Amen.
we don't need to say another thing.
Nothing. Not another word.
But let me tell you, like you, I was just like writing because
me too. I'm like trying to keep up.
So many things to say. Like one of the things I do want to really compliment and commend you on is giving your organization an identity, humanizing it. Like I had a cousin named Wanda, right? So I can relate to a Wanda, and I can say like, I want Wanda to thrive and be healthy and like, you know, live her best life. So I really appreciate that about how you framed your organization out the gate. So was that some of why you said, I'm going to name this organization, like to humanize it, and so that it could be a level of identity for a person who wants to get involved, or, you know.
Yeah, I can tell the backstory on that, and thanks for bringing it up. I too have a second cousin named Wanda, who definitely was a resource when she worked at OSU, and I was a student at OSU in Oklahoma. But it really boiled down to everything was fixated around my daughter. I saw my son eat healthy. He was breastfed longer compared to her. She loves meats and sweets, had a mouthful of cavities, all the things. And but having worked in women's policy and gender issues, I knew if you thought about it as a Wall Street investor, she was the multiplier. You know, she could be the future mother, breastfeeding. She's feeding herself. She's feeding her community. She's the word of mouth marketer of all things good and negative. She is the one that we've been waiting for. And so for me, being 4, I thought, what name could a child say that is easy? We know mama, dada, baba, Wanda. So I took the name Wanda and then reverse engineered, what do I want it to be? I think like a silo smasher. I want to cut through these siloed institutions of food and ag and nutrition and dietetics and bring them all together, because that's what I was seeing in the global nutrition space. Nutrition sensitive agriculture. Why are we not talking about it here in the US? Why are we thinking of feeding millet to birds, but not to humans? And so it was just in that moment of the simplicity of what it means to be a good comms person, that you have a name that people can remember. And the deeper part, if we do want to go down that line, is this: yes, we have dehumanized Black people, dehumanized all things affiliated with Black people, including our food. And so the ability to rehumanize the data, the people, the food is also another element to this, on top of having Wanda as not only a name of an organization, but our ambassador, our mascot, Little Wanda, that we have a design patent for, to then be the face and the voice and really the calling card, like Smokey the Bear for forest fires, but food for the culture.
Mm.
Man.
Yeah.
Okay, Rochelle, I'm gonna let you go because I could take over.
There's a lot, right? And I
Yeah.
mean, I'm glad you asked that question because I know Tambra, so she's told me the WANDAs, but I'm glad you picked it up. I take us into the equity, the injustice piece, right? Because I think a lot of times when we think about food, especially as public health folks, behavioral sciences folks, it's like just eat better, right? Meal prep, right? Like that's what we want to do, right? And those are still important things, and shop at the place where you can get the whole foods, but those are things that are expensive. It takes time to do these things. We're living really busy lives, very full of consumption, and not always the best consumption. But you talk about food from a place of equity, and you bring in history a lot into why it needs to be a conversation around justice, right? So can you give us some insight into why we should think about food from that perspective, particularly as Black parents, as belonging to the Black community? Why is it so important for us to frame food in this way?
Yeah, and I'll start off how we opened, which was we are the cultural keepers. And so if we were to think about the declaration that we've made on our website at iamwanda.org, we have meal healers as one identity, and understanding that in linking that with nutrition justice in communities that we live in and where we face food apartheid, which is a term coined by Karen Washington, an urban farmer out of New York. We have mothers, we have aunties, we have grandmothers who have always healed food, turning collard greens and sweet potatoes and okra and millet and beans into meals that sustain the body when systems denied access. We have nutrition justice framed as food not as a privilege, but as a right, which is why we put forth the Food Bill of Rights in the last few years, and encouraging people to realize while US and Israel did not sign on the UN Declaration of Human Rights, specifically when we look at the right to food, we dive into that one line and lay out 7 articles of how we see right to food looks like from a Black woman perspective that we've been pushing forward. And so they can go to foodbillofrights.org to check that out. For healing meals becoming a tool of liberation and restoring our health is where systemic neglect has created disease. When we think of diabetes, we'll have the phrase that diabetes, just runs in my family. So it's an expectation that I'm going to have diabetes. My mother has diabetes, both my grandmothers. One died of complications of diabetes. The one grandmother, Ruby, who is still alive at the age of 98, is a retired nurse. She's had diabetes. She's managed stroke. She's overcome. She has her full faculties. And so I lean into the possibility that I just celebrated a birthday within the last few days, and to be this big age and not to have any diagnosis, any pharmaceutical pill prescribed to me, when I have friends around me who I went to school with, on hypertension meds, on metformin, all the things, it speaks to, is this genetic or is this lifestyle? And is a lifestyle that we've chosen to be a part of a Western lifestyle, or push back and say that while the world is on fire, my house is not? I think there's an ability to have a house, a community on fire, and you save, you be able to push back against those narratives and save yourself. As I say that, I'm mindful about the collective, right? Not the individualistic way of truly saving our literal selves, but in order to be an embodiment of an example and a role model of what it means to build a legacy of generational health, when the world says through eugenics, your Black life does not matter. Therefore, we cut social protection programs like SNAP-Ed and the rest, because we know that if we remove those resources, you will wither away naturally through natural selection. I mean, that is the deeper meaning of why we don't have universal health care in this country. Why do we don't have a basic right to food in this country? Because it's steeped in oppression, depression, and suppression. And that is the way the system is designed. So if we know and believe that, and I know Harriet could not save everybody. We see the internet right now and how it's operating. So the question is, for those who have the mindset and consciousness of wanting and able to be saved, we say to them, we are the cultural keepers of food sovereignty. Food apartheid has stripped culture, erased indigenous seeds, African crops, traditional practices, but cultural keepers have preserved them. So keeping food culture alive is a political act. It asserts that our seeds, our recipes, our rituals are not expendable. And in the context of nutrition justice, cultural keeping is about reclaiming agency over what nourishes us, rejecting corporate control, and choosing sovereignty over survival scraps. And the ability to dream is the next part I want to leave us with, because we may have a nightmare, but we don't have to dream of a perpetuation of the nightmare, but we can have freedom dreams. And so dreaming has always involved guided liberation, for Harriet Tubman's vision of freedom to Dr. King's dream of justice. So in the work of WANDA, freedom dreaming means daring to imagine a world beyond food apartheid, where our children grew up with fresh produce, not corner store junk, where Black farmers thrive on their own lands, and where cultural foods are honored and not demonized, and where nutrition is healing and not harmful. These dreams fuel this fight for nutrition equity, for justice, turning what seems impossible to inevitable.
Ooh, wow.
Awesome.
I got chills. It's amazing. Like I'm gonna be honest, like I've thought about nutrition in the more medical model format, obviously, because of my training. But
Yeah,
just
thank the West.
I mean, love how there's a lot more thought in this process of nutrition and the concept of nutrition that I had never even scratched the surface on. So I'm learning a lot today, and I appreciate what you're bringing to the audience, because honestly, as a professional, I know that I don't know the depth of what, or I haven't. Maybe it's not knowing how important nutrition is, but not really applying it like I should. Um,
Yeah,
Glossing over it, like you say, maybe being conditioned to think that this is
yeah,
inevitable. So I agree that level of communication or what you're listening to, and I think I mentioned this even before we came on camera. It's like we are conditioned by the media we consume and the health communication that we consume. And I believe that all of your expertise in that area certainly helps to better inform people in a way that's credible, where your goal is to ensure that the knowledge that they're getting is going to ultimately help them be the best person that they can be and have the best quality of life. And I truly, truly value that. And I wanted to ask you on this kind of on the back end, there's a lot of, and honestly, I have one in the box that I've kept saying I'm going to do is like hydroponics and growing and being more kind of a grower of your own food.
hmm
Is there a element of what you guys offer in the Wanda movement about, self-sustaining, promotion of that and resources around how to do that? And I think about not only growing and doing, but also are there recipes or strategies or approaches to nutrition that you would recommend for the audience in moving toward a better nutritional effort?
So I first want to affirm the first part of what you shared, that everything is by design. The way in which you entered the conversation about nutrition from a medical model, that's how it was designed. The fact that it hasn't been contextualized to bring you in and welcome you, that's by design. And so know that if you have no intentional desire to seek out for yourself, no one's having a door opening up for you to enter either. And
Mhm.
so know everything that I've been working on and doing is because I channel Shirley Chisholm. I'm not even bringing a seat to the table. I'm not even bringing the table. I'm building the table factory so we can all have tables. That
Mhm.
is the mindset for me. And that's what I mean about challenging and reimagining the way in which they will leave you with crumbs versus realizing you can have the whole damn bread factory. That's just the way it is.
Yep.
And so that's how I want to open up to the second part around what you shared. That is really the embodiment of food sovereignty.
Mhm.
Um, and that is what we said is part of what should be a right to food, is not simply having access to food at a grocery store or the food
Mhm.
bank,
Right.
um, but the ability to grow your own food and having the land to do so and space to do so, like community gardens.
Mhm.
And so we are in conversation. This is the week of CBC. I'm in conversations, panel discussion, giving opening remarks at GW for the conversation of rural and urban farming and food sovereignty for Black communities. And so that is one. And then speaking at CBC with Representative Robin Kelly of Illinois, that's been pushing for food as medicine legislation,
Yeah.
but also she's a member of Sigma Gamma Rho Sorority Incorporated, and they also will be a part of the conversation called A Recipe for Equity around diet and obesity and maternal health for Black women and looking at our
Mhm.
lives over the lifespan. And so that's part of the Help Bring Trust that she chairs on Friday for that 3 hour window, different health conversations. But I'm part of not only policy conversations, conversations that is part of the ecosystem, but also designing programs through our work. We just launched our first maternal food as medicine pilot program called Nourish for Black birth workers and doulas and lactation consultants. It's wrapping up. And one of the parts that came out of it in our initial baseline screening was understanding how they even had exposure to nutrition training, which
Mhm.
many of them had not. And we know that when you're a mom birthing baby, nutrition is everything, as
Mhm.
well as self care and stress management, emotional
Right.
wellness. And
Mhm.
so to be able to have someone be armed with additional resources to support you and add value to the gestational process, as well as just the epigenetics that is happening in that moment of how are you feeding yourself and your newborn in utero and coming out. Those first 1,000 days are critical. And
Mhm.
so for us, while there's been a focus of we need more nutrition education in medical schools, when you
Mhm.
look up the makeup of the population and how it's changing, while it's skewed more female, the reality is who has always been the first line of defenders of life, Black life. We have midwives, we had birth workers and doulas. And to
Mhm.
know that back history of them being systematically targeted and erased and replaced
Yeah.
is to know how these systems are being designed. And
Mhm.
so for us, this idea of food sovereignty is beyond just growing food. Food might be an opportunity to start the conversation,
Mhm.
but it goes beyond that when you realize that our Black bodies has always been growing food. It just wasn't feeding us. It
Right.
was feeding
Oh,
others.
that's powerful. Okay, Rochelle, go ahead because I have some other follow up, and I want to make sure you're part of the conversation because
Yeah, I'm here.
I
I'm
know.
present. I'm
Listen,
present.
I
I'm present.
got
I'm
so many
thinking.
things.
Yeah, I'm really thinking deeply. I hope our listeners are too.
Yeah.
I don't want to change the course. I was going to ask a question about food as addiction and why we keep making bad choices, or when it picking the wrong things, even when healthy options are there. But I want Rasheeta, if you're going to pick up just what she said, then
So we're gonna come back to that because I need to know that answer. Why do I keep picking the bad choices? I am just excited. And you mentioned public programs. I had this written down, like public programs and food giveaways. Like I know that is very pervasive in our community. I know, like I'm from a rural town in Georgia. I mean, in Florida. Excuse me. Ooh, my people be like, what? Rural town in Florida, and so like that's huge. Like my home church there actually is a hub for the food giveaways, and a lot of the churches are. So I wanted to know your perspective about that. I mean, obviously they get food from wherever. I don't even know where it's sourced from. But do you have perspective on that? I would love to hear.
Repeat that last question.
So I was curious about your perception of the public food giveaways, like the programming around that. I think it's like Food of America or something like that. But basically, a lot of churches, I know a lot of Black churches in my little rural town are hubs for it, and they organize the distribution of it, but they are getting it from a larger source. So I was curious if you have any thoughts about that, where it's sourced from, to perpetuate some of the issues that you're mentioning. I mean, I know that they do have vegetables included in that, but again, I don't know the source of where that food comes from, but it's a major food source for those communities.
Right. So I can share that in an op-ed that I wrote for Civil Eats of why we need a food bill of rights. I highlight my cousin Leonard Hill, who's a Black farmer in Rentsville, Oklahoma, historically Black farming town, where our family still holds political leadership there. And I mention his story specifically because of the $1 billion that was cut from USDA that supported regional local food systems. And that was a grant that helped to connect local farmers with schools and food banks. And so it was a consistent flow of income for him to be able to be a vendor to food banks in the local community. And for many people, Feeding America has a network of food banks across the US that have autonomy and work with local and regional food systems to be able to procure and outsource and distribute from a logistics supply chain perspective to communities. And so while if I had not known that backstory and have not, had past relationship, I would be asking the same question, because historically, when we've looked at just the sheer concept of distribution of food, how it can uproot and displace local food economies is very real, even in Haiti and West Africa and other places beyond. I know Chef Jose Andres had noted that at a conference. It was not a conference, it was at GW when he launched the Global Food Institute a few years back there, about while they're providing and distributing food in communities, he admitted that it also has this unintended consequence when it comes to being competitive to the local food economy. And U.S. policies have definitely played a role in Africa when it came to the introduction of wheat. When you think about the French in Senegal bringing in Vietnamese rice, displacing fonio and millet and other local cereal grasses. So there has been a a century of this in the name of trade and aid. And so it's valid points to be brought up for sure. And everything is within context. And, one would say the ultimate goal should be like a case of Boley, Oklahoma, where my paternal grandfather, Reuben Crawford, lived with his family, and some still there to this day. I've been capturing my family history. And one of the recent visits this summer, speaking to one of the mayors, moms of one of the former mayors of Boley, to understand the story, is that Boley was a historical Black farming town that Booker T. Washington would praise and uplift in his speeches of a Black Wall Street. And in this town, since my focus is food, I asked her the question of, at what point, what was the height of how many grocery stores did Boley have? She said, easily 2024. Now, what Black community in America today in 2025 can you even say have half of that?
Right.
So when we talk about Reconstruction 2.0, Jim Crow 2.0, this is what it looks like. And having you not even know I might have mentioned going back to the Moors pre-Isabella Ferdinand in 1492, but let's just talk 1960s, 1940s, 1920s, of history that I was required as an Oklahoma student to take Oklahoma history. Never did I ever know the history of any of the 50 plus Black towns that were thriving in Oklahoma and recruited by E.B. McCabe, who a book is now written about his life, but he saw Oklahoma as a land of hope and opportunity, and try to recruit more than 40,000 Black families to settle there, to escape the racism. And so that's why we have such deep Black history there that has not been fully captured. Only some of those stories are coming out now, like Sarah's Oil, backed by Sierra and her husband, about before there was Madam C.J. Walker. Sarah was a young Black female millionaire who made money off the oil in her land, like how our family had mineral rights. And so these stories, and why we're in the field of communication, is that we must arm and leverage this critical tool that can help shape dreams and possibilities, hopes and futures for people to know it's anchored in a truth and a history of people who have not only survived and be resilient, but who have thrived in the midst of oppression. And that is the legacy of my own family that I'm excavating like an archaeologist of stories and songs and histories. But that should be the work of all of us when we think about family reunions and understanding how has food been a pathway and a signifier of our hopes and dreams of possibilities, that your life still matters.
Yeah. So there's, what I'm thinking about now, what I've heard is, one is, it's not a coincidence that as our history is under threat to be erased in many ways, it's that threat has never really disappeared, but we see a resurgence of that, right? It's also connected to our lack of understanding about how food is a part of our history, our rebellion, our resistance, our resilience, right? Like food has helped us withstand structural racism. It has helped us withstand histories of oppression. But somehow we haven't been taught that history in a systematic way, right? You have to go find it, you have to excavate it, as you say. So that's hard, first of all, because that's work, that's energy to go and find that. But there's also this part of our food habits that we think we have now as somehow this is the Black way. So we've been misinformed, right? It's the images on the media of these big fast food chains and that are globalized. You see our faces in these adverts. You see our faces on these campaigns as if that's our kind of food. right?
Exactly.
And when it comes to the healthy foods and the food from the ground and the soil, you don't see our faces in those campaigns. That's almost become, oh, that's white people stuff, right? To drink water, to not have white sugar in our things, right? To forget where molasses comes from, right? To make it seem like healthier options is not our culture. That's what has become mainstream for us. So when you have to go out in the streets and remind people of where their history is and where their food history comes from, do you find that you come up against that it's like, but that's not really who we are, because contemporary knowledge of our culture is fast food, right? So how do you help us resist that narrative, which is that, being unhealthy, diabetes is our narrative, high cholesterol, fried foods is our culture. How do you help to combat that misinformation?
And this is where I am, right? Of why I've gone down this path of realization, of being at the intersection of race, food, and media, but also gender, in this conversation, because even in the designing of, our website, very intentional, hired an Ethiopian woman graphic designer to ensure that it is built for us and by us. Our flag built by a South African woman. Like, everything is with intentional through the whole procurement process, and then the manufacturing of the stories of hiring Black creatives and storytellers, videographers, artists, and producers, because we have to be a part of the ones of creating our counter narratives to challenge not only system but ourselves, and how we have chose to drink the deception and the distraction of cultural appropriation and hijacking in a way that is diabolical, is no other way to say it. And when you look at the data when it comes to just HealthCom or studies of systemic reviews of what advertisements go in health magazines, like Black health magazines, you have to look at how certain brands just didn't either, I don't know, either by perception, belief that they're not going to have their products bought. So no need, and also just strategy, like when Honest Tea was around, they didn't really advertise. They saw event marketing as their strategy. And so as there's this whole lifestyle brand market, part of why I go into spaces, go to food shows and connect with brands, because the ultimate goal, that concept needs to be challenged. It's been beautiful to see more Black brands in that space. But even they need some help in making these connections, because at the end of the day, it is going back to, like, what are the platforms that we have that are owned by Black media makers, and how are those media makers connecting to brand creators? And now in the age of digital media, we have influencers. And so for me, this is why I've chosen this academic route to challenge this concept of health communication, that we know where the origin story is, but dream up new frameworks of how to bridge and build in nutrition for me is important. And so a lot of my kind of foundational work is looking at the spaces of narrative medicine, not out of Columbia, out of Canada, actually, Saskatchewan specifically, and coming from the Indigenous perspective of how stories can be used as medicine for the soul, but also prescription to create a prognosis for a patient. But I'm looking at a population level. And how does that look for Black folks and the stories that we tell ourselves? And how does that get embedded into the interventions for even birth workers to find the stories and the medicine in that to help with their patients? And so that is literally what we're doing in our food is medicine programming, that we're incorporating not just coaching, but incorporating understanding that all you need is already within your culture, your food, your community, your story, and having them unearth that for their patients to know that when you're designing out a recipe. So in our work, while we can make recipes and we have, when we created the WANDA Academy, in support with DC Healthcare Finance, they wanted to work with Medicare Medicaid population, but the reality is we have women with whole degrees, lawyers, government workers. Nutrition is one of those things that I don't care where you are economically, educationally, you don't have access to. And
Yep.
so that epiphany really hit home when we had our WANDA Academy. We brought women to Black women-owned farms, to Black women food retailers. We wanted to show them in WANDA's world, we are not only consumers, we are also producers. And to know that how Swiss chard and bitter leaf and collards grow, like some, they're post 40, never seen this stuff. And so as someone who was a former future farmer of America, grew up in Oklahoma, it was a mind blowing for me. Like, how do you not know? But we gonna learn today.
Tambra, so in FFA in my school was all like white people. Like it was
right. I
like
was at a majority white school. Yes.
Yes,
I
and so
understand.
we were. It was almost like So I remember there was one guy. His name was Sean, and he wanted to do it. He wanted to do FFA, so he like completely converted into them. Like you know what I mean? Like he felt like he had
kind of like what happens in nutrition too.
Yeah, he felt like he had to identify with them in order to get the knowledge.
Yeah, he didn't know about manners, and I didn't even till later in life. But yeah, that would have been the alternative.
Oh, okay. So what is the alternative? I'm sorry, what was
manners?
Oh.
MANNRS. Okay. So they tend to be affiliated with HBCUs, and they may have. I don't know if they have high school programs. Some do, depending on the leadership in the area, but mostly they're at HBCUs.
Thank you for see that little nugget right there. No, I appreciate that because I remember specifically like we always identified the farming element, even though our area was so agricultural. They always made it seem like it was the worst occupation to have but yet they're getting all this land and learning that it's actually very lucrative. We're being made to feel, because my grandfather, I mean, he continued to farm. We were so spoiled. He used to grow cane for us. He used to grow everything for us, and we just got it naturally. But and my dad still farmed. Like they still carried on their knowledge of farming from generations ahead, but they didn't pass it on to us because they, it was kind of for our generation. It was like, oh, we don't want our kids. That's not something we really want our kids to have to do, because it was made to seem so, like
backwards.
Backwards.
Yeah. It was made to seem that this is not for the future, right? And so because we're trying to get out of poverty, we're trying to move our community ahead, we're looking at the more industrial jobs, right? The engineering, medicine, etc. And that makes sense, but I think it's unfortunate that, and Tambra said it, the brainwashing that we left this ancestral knowledge and wisdom behind.
That we brought
here. We were brought here to do the agriculture, and the agricultural, the power of America's agriculture in the world is due to
because of what we
enslaved Africans, right? So like that's a historical information, and it's in the Caribbean where my family's from. It's in Africa still to this day, where young people in Africa are going back to agriculture, even though there's this push to industrialize and now to get into the information age. You can do all of the things together. They're all still connected, right? There's industrial ways to farm, and we need to learn that new technology and even create our own. And it is there. People are creating things and they are innovating really important ways to till the land, right? But the issue for me is that the belief that being close to the land, to the ground, finding our own foods is still, there's still a stigma attributed to this, right? That is like, that's an old time thing. That's backwards. In other words, it's almost like you feel like you have moved up when you're able to buy fast food. Right? So I think about when I visit, you know, the land of my ancestors in Jamaica and how industrialized it has become, and seeing all these fast food joints pop up. And when I was a kid, it was hard to find that. We actually used to complain to our parents, like, where's the nearest, you know? And they were like, no, you're in Jamaica, you're eating food from the ground. Right. I remember our bodies being so well functioning so good after being there for 2 weeks, 3 weeks. And even here, like, you know, being able to go to the Caribbean market or the, you know, and finding the foods that are from our culture and how healthy it is, right? And now when I go to the Caribbean market, I'm fighting people who are not from the Caribbean to pick up green bananas. What are you doing here? Leave our food alone, right? But they're there because they know how nutritious this is, right? And they know that the substance of this food and what it does for the body, and yet we want to give it up, right? And so it's like, no, we cannot give it up. We have to keep it. We have to sustain it. We have to fight for it, because it is not just good for our bodies, but it's also good for our legacy, our history, and, you know, what we give to our children and their children. So it's like, it's identity too. Like, food is identity. It is. And I think that's the part where we've lost that a little bit too, and we have to reclaim it.
Yeah. And Tambra, we did this exercise before, and I would love to get your reaction to this excerpt. So it's about Jack Daniel's whiskey. And it comes from thefoodhistorian.com. And it just says that while so it says it's kind of in the context of slavery, and it says, let's just take a moment to recognize that Jack Daniels was taught how to make whiskey by Nathan Nearest Green, an enslaved man who used a charcoal filtering technique. He learned to clean water in West Africa to filter the distilled alcohol. He was Jack Daniel's first master distiller, but only got credit more recently. So I feel like that's a trend. I know I've heard things about other large brands that have made billions of dollars. And then you dig deeper and realize that they learned from Black people, I think, to our point just now. So just kind of any reactions from you, Tambra, and also Rochelle, about that, because I find that to be very common.
Most definitely. It's kind of what I mentioned, what the next cycle we're going through right now, the cultural erasure of Black intellect and contribution in the making of America. This is a rinse and repeat strategy from the colonizer, and it is, straight from the playbook. And if you perfected a skill, do you replace it? No, you continue to leverage and use it for your own gain, power, and dominance and control of the narrative. And so, as someone who does not drink alcohol, and I have comments just on that alone, and on the neurotoxin that we digest that does not have any nutritional value to our bodies, and has definitely been weaponized against people of indigenous culture and Afro descent. I will just look at this as a case of Black intellect only. When we have a scenario where, yes, we want to unearth these truths, we want to celebrate, we want to claim, it feels a form of reparations in many ways, and building Black businesses off of the legacy of our ancestral heritage. And at the same time, how do we do it in a way that is truly not just a capitalistic bottom line, but a community impact bottom line? And that's the part where we have to learn about, and why I do embrace the concept of social enterprise, that your bottom line is triple: people, planet, and profit. That slavery was the route to transitioning into the wage-based economy that was piloted in Massachusetts, thanks to Harriet Tubman, Frederick Douglass working with the governor at the time, and then transition to just straight capitalism post-Civil War, at a time when America was bankrupt. And while the greenbacks was a concept that Lincoln wanted to use, it was definitely not what industrialists and capitalists wanted to use, and change the way in which we saw ourselves, not even as simply citizens, but as employees of the corporation of the United States of America Incorporated. And so even that context matters in how we think and dream and make businesses, whether it's for Black foods or Black beverages, of how are we anchoring and building, because in many ways we're building on the same system that has perpetuated and created the injustices that we have today. And so we even have to challenge business models and the intent. And unfortunately, when you are in a space of filled with Black politicians, depending on how they vote, coming from Oklahoma, some of them vote just like a Republican. Because at the end of the day, it becomes jobs, jobs, jobs. That's the agenda, as if jobs is the only thing. So let's just take the work of Marcia Chatterland, who wrote the book Franchise. She talks about the role of McDonald ownership and franchise ownership help to create Black wealth. But when you look at the consequences of many of these operators, and I'm someone who, my first job was McDonald's. And at a certain point when I went to university and went from biology to nutrition, I felt like Harriet Tubman at the calendar: go away, go away. So I'm saying this because you have the nutritional consequences that comes from the consumption of a product that is steeped in metabolic syndrome, that fuels type 2 diabetes and all the other kind of chronic conditions. And we've seen it does not dissolve, grow mold, nothing. Like, it just crazy. And so I'm bringing this up because capitalism will have you focus only on how do you build money for shareholders, not what is in the best interest for the health of community. While it may seem as a community cultural center because of who the franchise owner is, don't get it twisted in terms of the bigger goal here. So that is why supporting local independent chains is critical. Those who have a cultural, a social responsibility that give back in communities. Not saying that McDonald's does not do that, but it's just one of many examples of corporations that we need to just analyze and acknowledge that we need a more diverse ecosystem, like we need our gut bacteria.
Powerful, powerful.
For sure.
Well, we have heard so much to digest on, right? To really think and come back to. This is something that I'm sure people will have a lot of questions. And as you do your work, Tambra, I know you face a lot of questions from people on, so what do we do now? And I think what gives me hope is that people are doing the work. We just have to connect, right? And as you mentioned earlier about the silos and really figuring out ways to connect the dots. You mentioned different health disparities, Black maternal health disparities, and how that connects to nutrition, diabetes, and different kinds of chronic illnesses, and how that connects to nutrition. And a lot of the times, the health interventions are at a behavioral level, not at a historical or a structural level. And what you've shared with us today is that it is beyond your individual behavior. Right. It is at the level of policy. It is at the level of history, right? And knowledge and knowing what came before us and why it has been stripped away. And so that in order for us to make conscious decisions about what we put in our food, we really have to know the full, the full picture of how we got here, right? How did we land in a place where, our options are fast food as a people, and we could say, oh, because it's the cheapest or because it's what's available. But there are other ways to negotiate and strategize around that, right? And, the cost of a banana, yes, might be high, but how do we figure out how to grow our own foods? My grandmother in Philadelphia on a concrete, had tomatoes, cucumbers, all the colored peppers, green, yellow, red, right there. And callaloo, right? Which is like American collard greens, right? All of that was on a strip, a little plot. And that's what we would have. That's how she would make salad for us. And I think about that, that innovation that is within our community. We don't need a lot of land.
We don't have a lot of land.
Families, and it takes effort, it takes time. I don't have a green thumb, but we can do it together, neighbors, right? My neighbor now, she started to do a herb garden outside. It's beautiful. And it's just for her to have her fresh herbs for her food every day. She's a nurse by training, Black woman from the South. And so she's bringing her ancestral knowledge of just figuring out, how do I want to retire? How do I want to feed my body as I retire? And I'm learning by just watching her, and I'm thinking about my grandmother. My mom has stuff. She now has her own gardens. And so just figuring out ways to sustain ourselves and not expecting people to do it for us. Because we know the agenda currently is not to uplift our community, not through nutrition, not through anything. And so we are in a fight, right? We are in a fight for equity, but we're also in a fight for our lives. And so thank you so much, Tambra. We want to give you a chance to tell us where your hope comes from. And then Rasheeta, please close and tell us your hope as well.
Before I share the hope, I do want to touch on the one part that you did raise that I may not have provided a response, but I just want to leave the audience recognizing that part of my talks when I go and travel and talk in Nigeria, Ghana, Ethiopia, wherever, is understanding that the message is the West assumes that they're better than the rest of us. And the canary in the mine is the African American experience when it comes to what is happening and shaping Africa. And meaning the diabetes, the metabolic syndromes, growing as the social status affiliated with Western brands is growing, which is highly problematic. And so what is seen similar to how the cool cigarette and Newports market themselves of beautiful Black lifestyles with the product in hand inserts, that is the same dynamic of what we have with the pulverization of Western foods being diabolical in its ability to leverage and milk the desires of people who want to be belonged. And by you having association with this product, therefore you are, but you're really not. So I need us to understand, like, there's a deeper level of when you study media marketing and research, that manipulation is at the core of understanding and leveraging and profiteering off of the innocence and the desire of belonging, which belonging is the heart of my research. Transforming in a belonging scholar. So looking at Black women's sense of belonging and community, and ultimately how does it affect their health? And so for us, my interest is how does food play a way in that belonging, and how do we not find ourselves belonging to the very thing that will reduce our health versus improve our health? So that level of consciousness and understanding, like, the deeper parts of our minds of when we link it to childhood trauma. My mama didn't want me. My daddy didn't want me. Coca-Cola wants me. They love me. Know how products can be used in replace of where love should have been sown and grown.
Wow.
And if we don't understand that deeper connection, we'll continue to be pimped and profited and pulled in the direction that is away from our history, our ancestors, our soul completion journey. And ultimately, that is the goal of these foods, these man-made foods, is to be the false sense of provisions that redirect you off your path to your purpose.
That is so deep. Tambra, why are you starting this and we trying to wrap up?
Girl, listen, we got to have a part 2, 3, 4. Yes, I got a whole thing over here.
So much. I just thought about some of
we didn't even get to food addiction.
We didn't even get to food addiction. We'll come back to it. But I think about, Coca-Cola ads and the way that they, bring in celebrities, right? Black celebrities that, like, you talk about belonging and you want to be like that person, right? And the seeing it, and we know the science behind these messages.
Pepsi did it too. Like,
it's actually Pepsi.
They are, yeah.
They rinse and repeat the same playbook.
For sure, right? And so just all of these big brands use our culture, our pop culture, to pull us in, to give up our real deep ancestral knowledge and culture, which is
the next one. We got to have a session on brand, and we're gonna have you decode some of the branding. Like, we'll have a little bit of clip of some of the branding and see if you could give us some insight on it.
Because if you see the trajectory right now in the anti-DEI space, everyone's becoming belonging is the buzzword. Right. Target, Teacher of America. You just see the jobs, right? So if I wanted to, I could go into one of these jobs, right? Because why I chose belonging and pivot away from my initial research on gains for health is that in the midst of the pandemic, I saw a trend where folks could not find anchoring institutions as vessels of truth and timeliness. And so they were building their own communities within these tech platforms and finding and sharing resources. And I was concerned with women and Black women. And in addition, women's research was on the decline and now it's just in the gutter at this point. And so I was like, if I do no other research, let me center us and understand the social phenomena that I'm seeing. And I was challenged by my committee of not simply being some health misinformation scholar, which I was writing around health misinformation policy and social media platforms, but then shifted to look at the heart of what my work with my team has been, which is community-based communication. And I'm my foundation is community health, community nutrition. So to see it from a comms perspective, I was like, but of course. And so now looking at the power of community and like sitting in that and not rushing to leave the program, but understanding community for us as Black folks goes back to Ubuntu. I was just published in a new anthology called Serving Up Food Identity and Culture. And I write an essay around collective identity and rooted around sisterhood, Black food feminism, and why that matters, and how my personal journey came to this space of understanding that our concept of communalism has always been a part of us. So when we talk about the erasure of not only DEI, but culture, is how we even relate and build natural kinship, and how that sense of belonging in community has now been spliced, diced, just like DNA, and insert false equivalents of foreign invaders to assume that they're part of community. In essence, giving the invitation to the picnic for folks who have dubious, nefarious reasons to be at the picnic, i.e. certain brands that should not be at the table. And so we're not seeing the deeper elements of that conversation, that our whole being is about community. And so if folks have analyzed, assessed our history, and we don't do the same in reverse, we won't realize the power of manipulation on a grand theft auto scale that we have been played into.
Well, listen, I'm not going to add one last thought that I hope that everyone takes all of this in and really think more deeply about what we consume And
Buy black.
yeah, but
Right.
there you go.
Yeah.
So I appreciate, oh God, every moment we had with you, Tambra. I know you're super busy, and I can only imagine how many people are pulling for you to be a part of their platforms or to give them something from your wealth of knowledge. So thank you so much for just joining us today. We hope we can we humbly hope that we can get you back here and also continue the conversation. So I know I have so many things that I would love to engage you with, and I know Rochelle does too. But we have to let you
Yeah.
some of your time back because we could be here all day just listening to all of the wealth of knowledge, and I'm sure the audience feels the same way. So thank you so much to you out there. I hope you just value this information. It's not mainstream, this is not mainstream conversation. Like, we're trying to bring things out that just doesn't get talked about, and honestly, you don't hear this everywhere. So we hope that this was valuable to you as it was to us, and we look forward to seeing you on the next episode.
Excellent. Thank you, guys. Take care.
Take care.